topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to another Ask the Expert show where we bring you the top experts in the field of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. We have got an incredible show for you today. First of all, I want to welcome all of our new TikTok viewers and listeners. We have gotten some incredible emails from you that we are so happy to be part of TikTok now. We are going to be accepting questions. We started promoting this show about 3 days ago, and we got in probably about 15 or 20 questions for our expert. Let me introduce you to him, attorney Michael Mandelbrot. Good afternoon, Michael.
Thank you very much, Steve. Great to see you again. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
I got to tell you, your topic, we promoted it on TikTok for the first time. And we asked them, we said, if you have questions, please send them in. And we received so many questions on this topic, which is asbestos. Some of you might know it as mesothelioma. You are, Michael, one of the top attorneys when it comes to this. Tell everybody about your firm.
Of course. My firm, well, let me take a step back. From the day I graduated law school, I have been representing victims of asbestos-related diseases and cancers. That would be victims of asbestosis, lung cancer, and mesothelioma. A lot of lawyers go into, a variety of different fields, car accidents and other slip and fall cases, but not me. This has been the field that I have exclusively worked in for nearly 30 years now. My goal is to help any victim of asbestos-related disease around the country. I have represented victims in all 50 states, and although I am only licensed to be an attorney in both California and Oregon, one of the reasons that I have represented victims in so many different states is that if somebody was exposed to asbestos in California or in Oregon, for example, in the military, in one of their travel jobs during their lifetime, I can still represent them. If they weren't exposed in California or Oregon, then we work with a number of nationally renowned attorneys around the country who we would work with on your case.
Michael, what made you decide right out of law school that this is the field you wanted to be in?
Well, it's a great question. And, when I went to law school, I thought I was going to be a sports agent. I was going to represent athletes. I had written for the local newspaper, the sports section, throughout undergraduate. And ultimately, I thought that I would represent athletes. I realized that was an incredibly difficult field to really even get involved in if you did not play either professional sports or no professional athletes. And I wasn't the type of person to hang out at colleges and high schools and try and sign up people. It just so happened I grew up in Marin County, Novato, California, and there was a large law firm, kind of my, we'll call him my nemesis currently, Brayton Purcell, who represented victims of asbestos diseases. Both my parents were still alive once I graduated law school and lived locally, so I really desired to come back home and be around my family. More importantly, I've just always been an altruistic person. I like helping people. And it was an area of law that I saw that I could really help people who needed help. And it's been a very complex field, and I have learned a lot, and I'm still learning every day. And hopefully we talk about it at some point. Not all the lawyers in my field are good guys. They're not all good guys, and that's one of the things that I've learned, and it's a little bit scary.
Michael, I'm going to probably freak you out a little bit. We never talked about this. I was a sports agent for about 15 years. And it's funny, you said that you thought you had to be an athlete. I thought you had to be an attorney. And at the time, you did not. So I spent many years representing mostly pro football players, but it's a tough field to get into. But we have something major in common. So, but I was shocked how many people wrote questions in, Michael, and probably 4 or 5 of them we gave your phone number to. But I think I'd like to, because we have moved. This show is so important. We have moved the show to the entire 50 minutes of the show. And I think I'm going to start off with questions that we receive, if that's okay, Michael.
Absolutely. I'm happy to answer any questions at any time.
Okay. So first one is, and this is from Sacramento. What if I'm unsure where or how I was exposed to asbestos?
That's a great question. And when somebody has an asbestos related disease, and we have, as I mentioned in the previous podcast, we as lawyers really become investigators to try and determine how and where they were exposed to asbestos. And so usually what we do is we will just start with their work history and the various places that they work to try and determine if there may have been asbestos exposure at one of their occupations. Most people do not know all of the different products that had asbestos in them. So they may have worked at a packaging company, for example, but not knowing that the boilers and the machinery had friable asbestos containing products and they were being exposed. Maybe there was a facility they had worked in that had fireproofing throughout the facility. So really, to determine how somebody was exposed to asbestos, it really takes a lot of investigation. Some of the common questions that we will ask people: where did your parents work? In case one of their parents brought asbestos home on their clothes. Did you ever work with brakes or on automobiles in your lifetime? Did you ever work at an industrial site, a factory, a refinery, a shipyard, a power plant? Did you ever, and realize we have clients who will answer no, 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 and we cannot figure out how they were exposed. But we always are ultimately able to find out how. Like in that example of the no, 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 this was a 34-year-old individual diagnosed with mesothelioma. When he was in high school, the gymnasium had a full renovation take place with asbestos containing products being removed and disturbed, and they still had PE every day in the gym. We had the construction records. He also worked summers sweeping up on his grandfather's construction sites. So we had to go back to those construction sites and determine who are the contractors, when were those sites built, what products were used. So there's a tremendous amount of investigation that takes place. And one of the things that makes things even more challenging is the experts in our cases will say that every significant exposure would have contributed to the asbestos related disease. So, what is significant? We're talking about maybe a week of exposure, one whole day of doing drywall installation. It's always difficult to tell, but it takes investigation, it takes discovery, it takes research, and it also takes records, construction records, knowing what products these sites were originally built with. If we end up with nothing, did you ever use Johnson and Johnson's baby powder? I do want to note one of the amazing law firms in my field, Dean, Omar, Branham, and Shirley, got a $280 million verdict against Johnson and Johnson yesterday for somebody who was
Wow.
diagnosed with mesothelioma, a young lady who was exposed in Korea, lives in the United States now, and her only exposure to asbestos that we could determine, or that law firm, I wasn't involved with the case, they're a great law firm, the only exposure that they were able to determine was exposure to Johnson and Johnson's baby powder, which I think most people used growing up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, was in every military store, every Safeway, Rite Aid, CVS, you name it, it was there.
That's funny you said that because we get a lot of calls and letters from our listeners saying, "How come you're not doing a show on Johnson's baby powder?" And we see it commercials on TV all the time, but that must be Johnson's baby powder is used by many people. So that must be
Yeah,
why we get so many letters on it.
yeah, it's real interesting too, because, unlike asbestos, where it's usually there's inhalation through the lungs or a traditional asbestos exposure, because people use Johnson and Johnson's baby powder in various hygienic areas, maybe the groin area, for example. We are seeing other diseases as well caused by this asbestos containing Johnson and Johnson's baby powder. It's not just mesothelioma, it's also ovarian cancer, very
Oh,
significant amongst women as well. So, it is a very unique exposure. It's something that over time, we're going to see more and more people diagnosed whose only exposure is to Johnson and Johnson's. But at the time we're actually speaking, Johnson and Johnson's, as most corporations do, are making every effort to um, deny that their baby powder contained asbestos, deny that there was exposure to their baby powder. And it gets real technical, but what they're trying to do, we call it the Texas two-step. They created a new company, transferred their liabilities relating to talc and asbestos into the new company, and then declared the new company bankrupt to try and evade some of the liability. Like we've had in asbestos, they want to set up an asbestos trust to compensate people, but the asbestos Trust funds, as we've learned over the last 25 years, you only get cents on the dollar that you should have gotten. And Johnson and Johnson's clearly is not a company who has any issues with solvency. The bankruptcy courts are for companies who are actually bankrupt. They're, last time I checked, a $349 billion company. So it's real interesting to see how it's going to play out. I am not involved in it, but many of the lawyers in my field are.
You know, a lot of people wanted to know uh, what how do you determine their compensation?
Well, that is a great question. In any lawsuit, whether it's an asbestos case or a car accident case, any type of case, you typically hire an expert who will do a damages report. You've got your economic loss, if if which is, for example, if they're out of work, and then you've got their non-economic loss, the pain and suffering. And obviously, that's what juries are for, to put a value on quote unquote pain and suffering. There's also other figures that economists come up with. For example, you've got household services that somebody loses. If somebody's got mesothelioma, they can't take out the garbage and go shopping and do all the things that they used to do, and there's a value to those services. When you litigate these cases, clearly you are alleging a tremendous amount of damages, especially if somebody is ultimately going to pass away from their asbestos-related disease. On top of that, of course, you've got what's known as punitive damages. And if you are successful in a case against a defendant, you may have a right to also go after what's known as punitive damages, which is a second trial, in essence, to punish the defendant. And those trials, part of the punitive damages awards is based on the value of the defendant, how much money that defendant has made. So, like, for example, and I haven't seen the verdict form, I suspect that Johnson and Johnson's judgment of $280 million, a portion of that is attributable to punitive damages. A large portion is attributed to her pain and suffering. And then, of course, there is economic loss as well. But it's very difficult to determine damages. Once you've been in this field for a long time, you start to see patterns. Somebody who is 70, who was exposed to this product, this company has traditionally settled for this amount, say $250,000 in a mesothelioma case, a similar mesothelioma case. So you start getting ballparks as to how far you can push the defendants in these cases, but it's only a guide, and every single case is different in terms of damages, because it's all about the sick person.
You know, it's so amazing, Michael. You do so much work before you realize their first time.
You're absolutely right about that.
Because you work on a contingency basis, right?
Correct. Every case we have ever taken, and all of the firms who we've ever worked with, only handle these cases on a contingency. And as I think I mentioned in my last podcast, I think that contingency to the lawyer should be relatively low, 1/3, meaning if we got $100,000, 1/3 goes to the lawyer and 2/3 go to the client. A lot of the law firms in this field, one of the things which I'm very uncomfortable with is they sign up clients for a contingency agreement that's 40% or 45%. That's too much money to go to the lawyer. We will do just fine if we properly litigate these cases on behalf of clients, that 1/3 to the lawyer is fair. And you are absolutely right. We may retain a client, have to spend money on filing a complaint, getting all of their records, doing depositions, hiring experts, taking expert depositions, going to trial. We could spend hundreds of thousands of dollars before we see a penny on that case. But it's something that, I know our clients very much appreciate, and I think our listeners, once they understand it as well, will appreciate. We have skin in the game when we represent somebody. We have skin in the game. And when you hire a lawyer for any type of case who bills by the hour, they don't. Their skin in the game is billing as many hours as they can. And it makes a huge difference when somebody represents you, as I have found. If you've got skin in the game, if I've got skin in the game, my goal is to get you the most money as a client, so we make the most as an office. Our goals are
Exactly.
completely in line with each other. When you're an hourly lawyer, your goal isn't necessarily to get as much as you can for your client. Your goal is to bill that case as many hours as you possibly can before resolving it. That's what typically a billable lawyer hours goals are. And that's one thing that really does trouble me.
Michael, how many of your cases, what percent settle out of court?
98%, I would estimate. About 98%.
That high?
That high, 98%. There is probably, my best estimate, about 12 verdicts a year across the country in asbestos cases, maybe 15 across the country. And there is probably at least 3,000 to 4,000 cases filed a year. So you can see it's a very small fraction of those cases. And I'll tell you why that is, really. It's not because we as plaintiffs' lawyers have any fear of going to trial. It's on the other side. It's the defendants. The biggest fear is what happened to Johnson & Johnson yesterday, is that they are going to be the last man standing in these cases, because usually you've got multiple defendants, 25, 30 defendants in any individual lawsuit. But the biggest fear of these guys is that they're going to be the last man standing. They end up going to trial, and the jury rings the bell against them like they did against Johnson & Johnson yesterday. Because at that point, you could have settled that case for maybe, say Johnson & Johnson could have settled that case for probably 10 million. This is, again, a guess, for probably $5 to $10 million. And now they're on the hook for a $280 million verdict.
Yeah.
And so the reason that many cases don't go to trial is there's too much risk on the other end. Too much risk when you've got a good case against a defendant. They don't want to see that courtroom. They are afraid of you ringing the bell and getting a knockout like this law firm, Dean, Omar, Branham, and Shirley did yesterday. So that's why.
Michael, one of the letters that we got was from the Malibu area, and we gave them your phone number and your email. They wanted to know where your offices were. And we told them, they said, what if I'm too ill to travel to your office?
That is a wonderful question. I am a traveler. I realize these people, our clients, these victims, typically not only do they have an inability to travel, but they can't afford to travel. You know, a lot of these
Mm.
people are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. I will get on the plane the next day. I will get in the car the next day. I will come out to wherever uh, any victim of mesothelioma is. Before I went to law school and before I worked in this field, I was in I lived in Michigan and I was in Ohio and California, and that was it. And once I started working, I was on the road almost every single week because it's not just retaining the clients, it's all parts of their case. They can't travel for their depositions. So we always travel out to them. So the answer to your question is I will come to you. I will come to
Okay.
you wherever you are in the United
It doesn't get
States,
any
in
better than that.
Canada. Yeah, absolutely. I am happy to help victims of asbestos related diseases.
Michael, it seemed like some of these people were very nervous about possibly suing their employer.
Great question. So I hear that all of the time. Okay.
Oh, do you?
And yes, hey, you're not going to go after them. They were real good to me during my lifetime. They fed my family for 25 years um, and that sort of thing. I'm just going to try and get a little more light in here. Give me 1 second.
Go ahead. We're here. We're talking
One
with
second. I just got to open a few shades.
attorney Michael Mandelbrot. He's
All right.
an attorney.
All right.
We're
So,
talking about asbestos.
people often do not obviously want to sue their employer. And what's interesting is when somebody walks into the office and says, I have mesothelioma, one of the first things I say to them is, you can't sue your employer. Because in California and in most states, except I believe Pennsylvania, unless there is an exception, we are precluded from going after an employer. The only way you can go after an employer, the only possible way you can go after an employer is a workman's comp case. Now, that's unless the employer knew they were exposing you to asbestos and specifically unless their conduct was reckless, is I think what the legal term is. And that's very difficult to prove. So we typically cannot even go after the employer, just like we can't sue the Navy. Often people had tons of exposure in the Navy. I'm going to tell you a quick story, a really good story as well, in just a second, about somebody who was in the Navy and wanted to get compensation from them. But it's something that we deal with, and our hope in these cases is that the employers will work with us as opposed to thinking that we are going to sue them. And the reason I say that is oftentimes they're the ones who have records about the construction of their sites or job sites that their men worked on or projects that they worked on or coworkers of our client on projects. So we will typically reach out to the employer and subpoena all of the records of our client and any information with regards to our client. And oftentimes those employers will work with us. Now, those employers, are they on the hook at all if they exposed a worker to asbestos? Well, yes, through workers' comp, but workmen's compensation cases have very limited fee structures. and there's a maximum amount that you can get from your employer in a workman's comp case. And I don't know exactly how much it is, but I think it's the maximum amount is like $150,000. And some law firms do help clients and file those claims in addition to the asbestos related trust claims and the lawsuits like I file. My firm does not. However, very similar question that I brought up with regards to the military. What if you were exposed in the military? Um, what can you do then? And the fact is, we again cannot sue the military. We can't go after them. But what you hear about oftentimes is what's known as a disability claim. And you can file a disability claim in hopes of a monthly disability award, which many of my clients have received, a monthly disability award from the military. So here's a quick story for you. I had some clients out of New York, the Toscanos. He was 82 years old. His wife, Ann, had called me. He had very severe asbestosis, but did not have lung cancer. His ships that he was exposed to in the Navy, two very old ships, we could get him a little bit of compensation from asbestos trusts, but not a lot for a couple of reasons. One, he didn't have mesothelioma. Two, these trust funds have been depleted incredibly by some other lawyers, which has left him very little road to recovery. So what I said is, why don't we try and file a VA disability claim and get you an award? And so what I did is I worked it up like I would any asbestos case and got the medical diagnosis for asbestosis for him. One of the problems I see with all of my clients is that very few local physicians understand asbestos related disease. And the meds that I was getting from his doctor in New York would talk about emphysema and COPD, and he barely even smoked. And I knew it was asbestosis. So I sent it to our doctors who reviewed it and gave them an asbestosis diagnosis. I then prepared the VA claim for the Toscanos and sent it to Ann to then send in on their behalf. I wasn't listed on the claim. My name's not on the claim. And I don't even make any money off of the claim. So it just so happens yesterday, Ann Toscano called me. She was really excited. She goes, Mike, we got 100%. Okay. Which is great, which means from this point on, just wait a second, every month they're going to get a check for his disability. And I don't know how much it is. Maybe it's 1,500, maybe it's 1,800. I don't know how much. It's not even my business how much it is. But I did ask them, I said, well, did they give you any retroactive money for the time that you have had this asbestosis up until now, up until the award? And she goes, Mike, we got a check for $170,000.
Wow.
I know. And this is from the government. This is their VA disability award. I make no money off of that, even though I did all the work and submitted it. It's not part of my representation. I just want to help them. And I am elated for the Toscanos. I am absolutely elated for them. So, I would say that's very similar to a workman's comp. Workman's comp cases for asbestosis, probably nowhere near as valuable as that. But I think there are much more victims of asbestos disease out there that have a VA disability claim, like the one I filed for the Toscanos, that, they go help get their VA rep, they don't have the proper meds, they don't get an award. I think there's more of those possible claims out there than there are workman's comp claims, and they're also more valuable for the clients.
Does the government tax that on the compensation?
Well, it's a great question. First of all, I can tell you with certainty, any settlement monies that we send to clients, any trial judgments, any verdicts, that money is not considered income. And what the government
Wow.
taxes is income. And there's actually a spot on I think your tax or your IRS form. I don't know what box it is, but it's personal injury settlement. And this is different than income. And so the answer is any settlement monies are not taxed. They are
Wow.
not taxed. So when we send a client a check for $20,000, that's $20,000 going right in their bank account without any tax obligation. Now, as far as a VA disability award, part of the award may get taxed, but I don't think the client has to pay tax on the monies they receive from the government. The government may withhold a portion of the award as standard income taxes, but as I think it through, let's see, I would think knowing the government, they would, because it's a disability award and you're disabled from working. And if you were working, it would be income, and thus they would tax it. I can't, next time we meet, I will do some research and answer that one definitively. But the answer to the question, personal injury settlements, no tax. Workers' comp, no tax.
Wow.
The disability, possibly taxed from the government, the VA claims. And it's not just if you were in the Navy, if you're in the Army, Air Force, there was Marines, there was asbestos, Coast Guard, there was asbestos at every single military installation built before 1980, every single one.
Michael, uh, what happens if, say, a family member passes away from mesothelioma? Can the family still receive compensation?
Absolutely. But, what's critical is in any case you hear about a statute of limitations. The family members, the heirs, absolutely have a right to sue. In California, the wrongful death statute of limitations, the time that you can sue from the time of death is typically 1 year. So say there's a spouse who lost her husband and they've got 2 kids to mesothelioma. A wrongful death case has to be filed within a year on behalf of the heirs, the wife and the children. Now, typically you would ask, how far do we go? Do we go to grandkids? Do we go to brothers, sisters? Typically, no. What the statute says is heirs. And if you've got a spouse, they would step into the shoes, or the wrongful death case would be filed on their behalf, and heirs. And heirs is the heirs are defined as typically the children. So if they've got either living issue or living adopted children, they would also have a right to sue. Typically, we would want all those family members to sue together in one wrongful death case. Now, I mentioned the California statute of limitations is 1 year. But other states have longer statute of limitations, like Minnesota's statute, I believe, is 6 years from diagnosis. Many states have 2 year statutes. I've got a list here: Nebraska, 4 years, Utah, 4 years, Wyoming, 4 years. So, in if you were exposed in those states as well, not if you necessarily live in those states, but if you were exposed, you've got longer than the 1 year. Cases are much more valuable if filed in California, the way the laws are set up and the way the damages are set up. So you would want to file your case within a year typically, but even if somebody contacts me and it's past a year, we will still investigate their potential lawsuit. And I want to add to that, even if someone was only exposed in California and they contact me 2 years after death. Well, as I mentioned, the statute's 1 year in California, 1 year from date of death. We would only have 1 year to file a lawsuit. Our statute would have run. But I would never turn somebody away like that, because many of those asbestos trust funds, their rules say claims must be filed within 3 years of date of death. So even if I couldn't bring a lawsuit for somebody and we lost maybe what we would call the big money from the solvent defendants, I could still get them compensation from these asbestos trusts if someone died 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and in some cases, even longer. And real quickly, for non-mesothelioma, for asbestosis and lung cancer cases, non-mesothelioma cases, I have never seen on a death certificate, it say asbestos related lung cancer. It says lung cancer. It never says
Right.
asbestos related lung cancer. So say 5 years after somebody dies, they contact me in California. I get the medical records. I send them to an expert. He reviews them. And 5 years and 6 months after that person dies, I get a diagnosis that says asbestos related lung cancer. That's the first that individual knows that they have a right to file a case. So their statute, even though it's 5 years after dying, even 5 years after death, there had never been a diagnosis of an asbestos disease before we worked up that case 5 years after death. So in some cases, we will represent families, 5, 10 years after somebody died. Now, when it's mesothelioma, it's very clear that mesothelioma, there's only one cause: exposure to asbestos. So in those cases, we've got to file within a year, because you can't argue they didn't know that the cause of death was due to asbestos, like with lung cancer.
What about these rural areas, Michael? I mean, do some of these doctors have a hard time diagnosing this?
Absolutely. Well, I don't want to ever give the impression that these doctors are just sort of rubber stamping medical reports if somebody has a medical related disease. Oftentimes, somebody has a lot of exposure to asbestos during their lifetime. They indicate that they've got breathing problems, and we will send their X-ray or CT scan to our doctor, and we will get it back, and it'll say no radiographic evidence of any asbestos related disease. And so there really is no scarring, no evidence of any asbestos disease on their lungs. And at that point, we cannot help them. Because asbestos is a progressive disease, and once asbestos is in your system, your disease can only get worse. It's never going to get better. And I know that even though this person wasn't diagnosed with any disease today, he might be in 18 months. I always tell them, look, I can't help you now. You don't have an asbestos related disease, but I'm going to put your file on hold for 18 months. If you continue to have breathing problems, call me back in 18 months and I will have you retested again to see if your disease has progressed to a point where I can get you compensation. So, diagnosis, it always starts with, well, if it's cancer, with a biopsy and what a pathologist says, that's always completely independent to us. And if it's not a malignancy or a cancer, then it would always start with a CT or a chest x-ray, a film or a disc sent over to a doctor trained in looking for asbestos related diseases to review it. And I will say these doctors, probably about, say 60% of the films you send them come back positive, but a number come back negative. And the way that, these films are read, these x-rays, there is dispute in the field as to what is a diagnosis, some dispute in the field. The critical thing for anyone who reads a radiograph, an x-ray, or a CT is that we need a what's known as a certified B reader, somebody who has an extensive skill and training, which gives them sort of a special license that they have been through this testing, that they are certified to specifically look for asbestos-related diseases. And very few doctors who review radiographs or chest x-rays are certified B readers. And that is very important, is to make sure that if you do have an x-ray reviewed, it's a certified B reader, because even the trusts require that a certified B reader review these films.
Well, I knew this was going to happen. This show has gone by so fast. We got in about 90% of the questions that people had asked. We've got so many more questions that we're going to have for your next show next month. Give everybody your phone number and your website address.
Absolutely. 1-800-970-DUST, which is 3878. 1-800-970-DUST. You can always directly email. It's my last name. You can see it on the screen. Mandelbrot at asbestoslegalcenter.org. Our website is mesothelioma.pro. Mesothelioma.pro. I really appreciate the time again, Steve, and I look forward to seeing you again next month.
Absolutely. It's Michael Mandelbrot, and we are so lucky to have him. Thanks, Michael. That's going to do it for us today. We'll be back again with you next week with more Ask the Experts.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.